Hello. Today we come to what can be called as Marx's most developed work. Over the next two lectures, I'm going to be talking about Marx's Das Kapital, and mainly I'm going to be talking about Capital Volume 1 in the English translation. Marx actually intended to write 4 volumes. The first volume, Capital Volume 1, Capital a critique of political economy, if you use the subtext also, is the only one he published within his lifetime. The others were assembled and put together largely by Engels and some others and published posthumously. Capital Volume 1 is about the production process. Capital Volume 2 is about the circulation process. Volume 3 is about the various forms that production takes in capitalist societies, and Volume 4 is about the history of theory. For the purpose of this course, I am largely focusing on Capital Volume 1. Alright, so the subtext of the book, a critique of political economy. I want to spend some time discussing the two big words in this subtitle, critique and political economy. So what does Marx want to do when he writes Capital, a critique of political economy? He wants to critique the discipline of political economy. And what does it mean to critique a discipline? By critiquing a discipline, there are 3 things that one needs to investigate or analyze. And the first is emergence. When does this particular discipline or field of inquiry emerge? As we spoke about in one of our early lectures, sociology also only could emerge at a particular point in history, sometime after Enlightenment, then the scientific revolution, and around the early ages of the Industrial Revolution. So it was only at that moment when the idea of the divinely ordained hierarchies or structures of society were dismantled could sociology emerge as a discipline. So similarly, political economy also emerges as a discipline when the relationship between the individual, the state and the market become a serious mode of questioning and obviously change. And different phases such as how do these relationships unfold in an agrarian society? How would these relationships, or how can the market make more profit in a mercantile society? How do these relationships transform in industrial society? So these are the kind of questions that political economists have asked. Largely political economy, especially the people that Marx is referring to here in Capital Volume 1, are Adam Smith, David Ricardo and Malthus. So mostly English political economy. That is because political economy he draws largely from England, which is where it flourishes as a discipline. Germany has not really seen political economy, that has been the domain of philosophy, and France has been a domain of political theory at that time. And Marx is somebody who brings together these very different, the philosophical imagination, the political economy, logic and structure, and political theory into his understanding of capitalism. So there is the emergence of the subdiscipline that Marx wants to investigate, not the subdiscipline, the field of inquiry, but also what conditions make that field of inquiry possible, and within what condition can it ask the questions that it can ask, and what are its limits? What questions are possible? What questions we don't even have the vocabulary for, or don't even emerge as something that is significant to answer in that particular domain or field of inquiry. So largely this is what the text is about, and he asks, what he's trying to answer in Capital is, what is the capitalist mode of production? How does it work? What are its limits? How did it emerge? And then how can it be dismantled? That is Marx's project eventually. Why does he want to do this? He wants to do this because he sees that the bourgeois political economy, or the approaches of many of his predecessors, has created an ideological field which makes even what might he will show us how it is unfair or unjust. Unjust relations appear as acceptable and just. So that is, and he wants to do that because he wants to justify his claim that he made earlier in the German ideology that it is the working class that will lead the revolution. So why should they lead the revolution? Because they are the most alienated, they are the most exploited, and in Capital Volume 1 he shows us how that exploitation happens. How does he begin Capital Volume 1? I have the first sentence from his first chapter right up here, and I'm going to start by reading that out. He writes, "The wealth of those societies." I think his usage of the term wealth is very obviously referring to Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, but let's read forward. "The wealth of those societies in which the capitalist mode of production prevails presents itself as an immense accumulation of commodities, its unit being a single commodity. Our investigation must therefore begin with the analysis of the commodity." He wants to begin this whole fat book. I mean, when you look at Capital, it's a fat book. He wants to begin that whole logical dismantling of the process of production by focusing on the commodity. So why focus this analysis on the commodity? Because the commodity is the most immediate. It appears in all societies where the capitalist mode of production prevails, and it is something that is unique to the capitalist mode of production. It's not that humans didn't make things of need prior to capitalism, but those things of need were not made primarily for capitalist exchange and circulation. So he wants to begin with something that is obvious and apparent and immediate, something that has not needed mediation, therefore is accessible to anybody who attempts to read Capital. If you want to get at the meaning of something, right? Meaning is usually lying in the depth of it, whereas on the surface is what appears, is what we think it is. A large part of Marx's project is to go deep and to uncover that which is lying hidden, which is not on the surface. On the surface is commodity. So he says, let's begin with the commodity and let's slowly start unraveling the production process. So once we begin with the commodity, he says, analyzing the commodity, a commodity will have two kinds of value. All commodities will have a use value and all commodities will have an exchange value. Use value lies in the usefulness of the object. A use value is its utility. It's a qualitative attribute of the commodity, right? It's a qualitative attribute of the commodity that satisfies human needs and wants. A use value, he then starts to break it down even further, contains two further attributes. One he calls the natural element and the other is human labor. All things that have use value will have something that we draw from nature and something that has human labor embedded in it, right? Because humans' interaction with nature through labor is the creative process in any society, right? That's fundamental and that we've spoken about before. Now, a use value is unique to every commodity. This camera that we are recording the lectures in has a certain use value. My scarf has a different use value. So it's a heterogeneous kind of a value. Like these things without mediation, in terms of immediacy, they cannot really be compared. Each one is very different from the other. So use values are a heterogeneous, qualitative kind of attribute. Now, in contrast to that, exchange value is a quantitative relation between commodities. And this relation is a contractual relation within civil society. I decide to buy something from you, you decide to sell me something, it's a contract we enter. I take up a job, I get a salary. I sell my labor. It's a contract I enter in the domain of civil society. Capital is a story of civil society under capitalism. He is trying to tell it using pure logic, without using, too much empirical data, or in fact any empirical data, without going into large important or unimportant historical facts and dates and figures. He wants to tell the story of how value is produced under capitalism through pure logic. This is a very different Marx from the Marx that we've known from, let's say, his theory of alienation. He's moved from Marx the humanist, Marx the philosopher, to Marx the scientist, Marx the social scientist. So that's the transition that we see so beautifully in his very logical outlaying of the production process. Now, exchange value. Exchange value, Marx writes, appears is an important term here, word here, appears as arbitrary or accidental. We don't know why the same chair costs an X amount if I sit on it, or if it is sold in one place, versus if it is sold at a different place, or if a famous person sat on it. This appears as arbitrary because, unlike use value, which we know very clearly derives from the natural element and human labor, exchange value appears as not really it could be made out of plastic or wood or whatever, but its value or its exchange value may not depend on any of that. And exchange value can go up and down also, right? So if there is, let's say, a war ongoing and the petrol prices become high, so then the exchange value of petrol would increase. It's the same natural material, it's the same amount of human labor that went into extracting it, and yet the value fluctuates. The exchange value fluctuates. Then he goes on to make yet another distinction, that between concrete labor and abstract labor. Concrete labor is the kind of labor that, in fact, we all do, and that is in the world of the particular. A carpenter carves a table, a baker bakes a bread, a tailor stitches a fabric. These are not necessarily not possible to compare with each other. I cannot compare a tailor's labor with a carpenter's labor. So this labor appears as very distinct from each other, and it's not possible to generalize or compare. In fact, concrete labor is time dependent. So we think of things like it takes 12 minutes to boil an egg, it takes 15 minutes to boil rice, it might take a season to grow wheat, and so on. I need to do something, it will take certain amount of time, and I associate it with that kind of time. Abstract labor, on the other hand, belongs to the world of exchange value. This is something that we can compare. In abstract labor, a task is time dependent. I go to work from 9 to 5 and I get X amount of salary. In 9 to 5, the labor that I've put in is abstract labor. At the time of exchange, the heterogeneity of concrete labor has to disappear. Otherwise, how do you compare? Two distinct or three distinct kinds of labor are incommensurable with each other. In order to compare them, you have to come to some sort of abstraction. It has to be some sort of equivalence that gets established. And in some ways, capitalism is a process of establishing these generalizations, these equivalencies. It's a great process of convention making. That is one of the things that Marx is trying to show us. Marx refers to abstract labor often as labor power. Labor power, whether it is the carpenters or the bakers or yours or mine or anybody's, is identical. It's that amount of work that has been done in this amount of time. It is abstracted out. It can be used as a common measure, right? And labor power is, I already said that, measured in terms of time, and it enables it enables labor to be sold as a commodity, in fact. So here, this is not from Capital Volume 1, it's from Wage, Labor and Capital, a text that predates Capital. But I think it was written in this particular paragraph is written in a very easy to understand manner. So in order to make this point of how abstract labor or labor power becomes a commodity, it showcases it very well. So I want to read it out. Labor power as commodity. What workers sell to the capitalist for money is their labor power. The capitalist buys this labor power for a day, a week, a month, etc. And after he has bought it, he uses it by having the workers work for the stipulated time. For the same sum with which the capitalist has bought the labor power, for example, 2 marks, he could have bought 2 pounds of sugar or a definite amount of any other commodity. The 2 marks with which he bought 2 pounds of sugar are the price of the 2 pounds of sugar. The 2 marks with which he bought 12 hours use of labor power are the price of 12 hours of labor. Labor power, therefore, is a commodity neither more nor less than sugar. The former is measured by the clock, the latter by scales. Labor power is therefore a commodity which its possessor, the wage worker, sells to capital. Labor power was not always a commodity. Labor was not always wage labor, that is free labor. The slave did not sell his labor power to the slave owner any more than the ox sells its services to the peasant. The slave, together with his labor power, is sold once and for all to the owner. He is a commodity which can pass from the hand of one owner to that of another. He is himself a commodity, but the labor power is not his commodity. The serf sells only a part of his labor power. He does not receive a wage from the owner of the land. Rather, the owner of the land receives a tribute from him. The free laborer, on the other hand, sells himself and indeed sells himself piecemeal. The worker belongs neither to an owner nor to the land, but 8, 10, 12, 15 hours of his daily life belong to him who buys them. So I think he makes it very clear here the difference between the slave, the serf and the wage laborer, and the wage laborer as doubly free and yet not. Alright, now I know I am introducing several concepts, but I am hoping that they will all come together as we unfold today and the next lecture. So now there is this abstract labor, there is labor power. How do we know how much value there is to a commodity? Well, he says that value in a commodity comes from a social average, and that social average he refers to as socially necessary labor time, and this is congealed in the commodity. Well, all things of value come from human labor, right? So all things of value that come from human labor, this human labor is embodied, is congealed, is deposited in the commodity. And how do we know how much value, right? If I bake a bread and I take 2 hours to bake it, and you bake a bread and you take 1 hour to bake it, then is it that there is more value congealed in the bread? No, that is not how Marx wants us to look at it. He wants us to look at the notion of social average. I already said capitalism is a process or is a system where averages, generalizations, equivalencies, conventions are getting established. So this socially necessary labor time gets deposited in the commodity, and this value that is the socially necessary labor time attaches only to the commodity. My baking a bread is not going to attach value to me. It attaches value to the bread, the labor time that has gone into the making of that bread. And this attachment of value to the commodity happens only in capitalist societies where commodities have this value. Another thing that is there in capitalism is that exchange of commodities becomes a generalized form of exchange. We don't think twice before exchanging commodity. It is a normal part of our social relations, how we engage with each other via money actually in this case. So generalized exchange of commodities is specific to the capitalist mode of production is another point that Marx wants to make. Now, social average productivity is also dependent historically on the level of technology, the level of science, the level of how people consider, how the society considers what would be the average amount of time that something will take, right. So, if I'm trying to bake bread without a beater, like without an electric beater, it will take me much longer to beat the bread. But then with the advent of the electric mixer or beater, it would take much shorter, right. So, the social average time or the socially necessary labor time that gives value to the commodity would change in these different circumstances. Within capitalist societies, the secular notion of time becomes the convention, the 9 to 5 job or whatever, the 12 hours of work that one puts in or the 15 hours of work that one puts into the factory. It is time on the basis of which I sell my labor, right. So, time is very central and the notion of time completely is changing. You see that, like in pre-capitalist societies, I would wake up maybe with the cock-a-doodle-doo and the sun rising, and then my having to go to the field, and maybe I'll take a relaxed afternoon and then go back again into the fields and do something, and then in meanwhile bake a bread, make a pot, raise children, all that, right. So, but here there is time is divided into capsules. There is, you get so much time for this and so much time for that. There is all this division that clock time brings into our life with this mode of production. I want to read out 2 more quotes from the same chapter here. Marx writes, "The labor time socially necessary is that required to produce an article under the normal conditions of production and with average degree of skill and intensity prevalent at the time." So, average, again, the establishment of a convention. All values, all commodities are only definite masses of congealed labor time. This is very different from how Adam Smith is conceptualizing value. Here, value is abstract human labor, labor power deposited in the commodity. This division of labor, here again he is critiquing Adam Smith's argument that it is division of labor that has caused society to become much more productive and then therefore brought value. He says, this division of labor is a necessary condition for the production of commodities. He agrees that much. But it does not follow, conversely, that the production of commodities is a necessary condition for the division of labor. In primitive Indian communities, there is a social division of labor without production of commodities. He is referring to the Indian subcontinent in this particular quote. So, the relationship between division of labor and the production of commodities not necessary, right. He dismantles one by one all these different notions in political economy to make his point. Alright, so this we have already established that as exchange values, all commodities are merely different quantities of congealed labor time. So, there is congealed labor time that has given value to the commodity. Now, there is yet another convention or generalization that happens, and Marx goes at length to explain it, and I am going to try to do it very briefly. He says, in the expanded form of value, if I have 20 yards of linen, I can maybe go and exchange it for 1 coat, or maybe 20 yards of linen will exchange for 10 pounds of tea, or maybe 1 ounce of gold, or maybe 20 yards of linen will exchange with 10 pounds of coffee. So, there is a certain equivalency that starts getting established, but these are still very relative. When I come to this understanding that 20 yards of linen as one particular value is equivalent to 1 coat, 10 pounds of tea, 1 ounce of gold and 10 pounds of coffee, that's when I come to a general form of value. And when that 20 yards of linen is replaced by the money form. So first the gold, 1 ounce of gold, let's say, so 1 quart or 10 pounds of tea and 10 pounds of coffee can be exchanged for 1 ounce of gold, or we can come to the money form, which is also a commodity that only has exchange value, does not have use value, but is a store of value, right? It's a store of value, and it is socially recognized as a generalized equivalent form. This too is a convention that is commonly understood within capitalism or the capitalist mode of production. I can go to work and get an X amount of salary, right? So that exchange is considered a fair exchange. Another quote from the same chapter on commodities, chapter 1. Commodities come into the world in the shape of use values, articles or goods such as iron, linen, corn, etc. This is their plain, homely, bodily form. They are, however, commodities only because they are something twofold, both objects of utility and at the same time depositories of value. So both these attributes are essential for a commodity to have. They manifest themselves therefore as commodities, or have the form of commodities only insofar as they have two forms, a physical natural form and a value form, right? Now, towards the end of chapter 1, he has a section titled Fetishism of the Commodities. This is a very fascinating section, and oftentimes also something that is, there is some bit of argument about this amongst. Fetishism of the commodity was in the appendix, was part of an appendix, whereas in the subsequent editions it became part of the chapter 1. But for cultural Marxists, this is one of, or theorists, this is a core chapter. If you want to do literary theory, if you want to do cultural theory from a Marxist perspective, then fetishism of commodities is the chapter that you will most likely go to. Now, what does fetishism of the commodity mean? It seems like very unrelated terms. What is fetish? You know, a fetish is when we attribute, or when people attribute special, magical, extraordinary powers to something, you know, like to actually something that is a thing which might be quite ordinary in a different circumstance, but in that particular context it is supposed to have extraordinary powers, or you know, is something that is very, very special. Marx is taking it. I've put up, in fact, this small little page, a part of a page from Tintin's Broken Ear, because this is one of the places where the notion of fetish becomes quite a central part of the story. In fact, there is this small little object that is named the Aramboo or something like that, Aramboo fetish, and then Tintin is going about solving the mystery around that fetish. So it's an object which has special powers. So you can think of it as a talisman, as a totem, something with great meaning and significance assigned or as to an object. This term, the word fetish comes out of anthropology, and that's where Marx takes it from. It's quite apparent even in the Broken Ear, Tintin's comic, because he's entering into the Museum of Ethnography, which is a method that anthropologists use in order to look at this object. Now he wants us to bring that same kind of logic of what do we attribute to commodities when we the idea of fetish to commodities. So here, let's say, what do we think of when we go to buy a sofa? It's, let's say, it's cost 15,000 rupees, or the t-shirt is 975, this chair is 9,000. There are price tags attached to each one of these commodities, right? What he's trying to tell us is that what appears in a commodity is its price or its value, But what does not appear in a commodity is the social relation between humans that has gone into making that commodity. So what gets hidden is human social interactions, the kind of, let's say, the kind of conversations that you and I had, the amount of labor I put in, the sweat, or the solidarity amongst workers, the difficulties faced, the concrete labor that went in, all of that is masked, is hidden. But what appears is primarily the value, or in common terms, the price, right? So in an exchange of commodities then, we feel that it's, that what we are exchanging, it's a fair exchange. I give you 10 rupees, you give me that object, right? So it's a very conventional thing to do. There is nothing, you don't think of it as something that is, that could perhaps be exploitative. I want to read out this small paragraph from this section 4 of chapter 1. He says, a commodity is therefore a mysterious thing, simply because in it the social character of the men's labor appears to them as an objective character stamped upon the product of that labor. Because the relation of the producers to the sum total of their own labor is presented to them as a social relation existing not between themselves but between the products of their labor, that is the commodity. This is the reason why the products of labor become commodities, social things whose qualities are at the same time perceptible and imperceptible by the senses. There is so much concealed, there is so much beneath the surface of the commodity. So when we exchange, it just appears to us as it is like a very regular thing to do. What is social, the relations that constituted into making that value, the labor power appears, what is social appears as natural, and what is exploitative in the system appears as a just exchange. I will go into this more in my next lecture on the notion of what Marx means when he calls this exploitative. Until then, thank you.